What's going on, people? You might have clicked on this thinking that I am a complete idiot, and maybe I am, but I just wanted to do a video on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the RAW files, 48 megapixel RAW files versus the Fujifilm GFX 50S2 that are 50 megapixels, right? I thought, hey, why not? And you're probably thinking, that's crazy because the iPhone sensor is super tiny versus the much larger sensor in the GFX system, right? This is something that, as a photographer, I want to know. I want to know how close those 48 megapixels are to the 50 megapixels. And I'm about to show you, but they're probably a lot closer than you think. Okay, everyone, I'm in Lightroom, and like I said, I shot as close as I could to get the focal lengths the same. For the Fuji, I was using a lens that had the equivalent of 25 millimeters, while the iPhone has 24 millimeters with its 48 megapixel raw camera / lens. So they weren't exact matches, but they were pretty close. So I think we were able to do some pretty good stuff. What I did is I shot on the GFX at f7.1, kind of trying to get close to maybe the bigger depth of field, the more range of depth of field that you get with the smaller sensor. And then I was just trying to kind of edit just a touch. I didn't do any sharpening or anything like that. I just edited a little bit of white balance and a little bit of brightness here or there to try to make the photos equivalent. If I had to edit too much, if I had to go up 1, 2, 3, 4 stops, I just deleted the photos because that's not a fair comparison. So here we are. The first couple photos are out in like crazy bright light. I thought it might be good to check them out in the best possible conditions, which is what we're seeing right here. So let's look at that photo first and look at that photo. This one's the GFX, and that is the iPhone. So from the farther distance, they're almost indistinguishable except for just, a couple small kind of deals. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to zoom into a couple things. So on the Fuji GFX, we're going to go full screen, and we're going to go zoom in on that car. All right, fine. That's what that car looks like. What we're going to do next is we're going to go over to the iPhone file and look at that. And if you look at that comparison, you could tell that the GFX is sharper, but is it, thousands of dollars sharper? Maybe, probably. For professionals, we pay for that little bit of that difference, right? But still, that's kind of crazy. Let's look at some other parts. If I go up here and I look at the building up here, the top of the building, I can see clearly the definition in that lampshade. I can look over here and kind of see some detail in what appears to be some birdhouses over there. If I go over to the Fuji or to the iPhone file, you can see that like the lampshade's much less defined, and so are the bird feeders. Like you really have to kind of guess on this one, right? So we can see some differences. If we go over to the far range in the photograph, you can see a lot more difference. So you got this kind of old bridge, and it's the only reason I know it's an old bridge is because I was there, and the other photo looks better. So this is the iPhone, and it looks kind of garbagey, right? Way back in the distance. Over here with the GFX, you can see a lot more definition. So right off the bat, we're seeing more definition in, like some of the fine details in the rear of the photograph, especially. But one of the things that you have to consider as a photographer is how are you going to use these files? And in any way imaginable, these are more than usable, like in almost any case, something like this, except for maybe printing like, 10 feet wide, right? Another one, let's just look at a couple examples here. If we zoom in on the GFX, we see the railing up here for the walkway. You can see a lot of the definition there. If you go over here to the iPhone file, much less. It's a lot muddier, right? And some of the colors kind of off. And there's an area of the bridge here. Where's it at? Maybe I'm crazy. Oh, it's right here. You can see kind of like the wear and tear on the bridge here. This area here, and looks like the camera right there. Over here on the iPhone, it's much less. It's more like smeared, right? There's that classic iPhone smear, but I mean, we're zooming in a ton, right? We have to remember that. We're zooming in to a point where it's probably not totally fair, right? Here's an image where this is the GFX. Again, it's at 7.1, 25 millimeters. And, I'm not trying to make some great art here. I'm just trying to do some comparisons. And it's one of the failings of the iPhone when you get a lot of crazy stuff bouncing around in the glass, right? So it looks totally different. And it's one of the challenges of using the iPhone in certain situations, and you just can't get away from it. And it's not going to look great. But if we zoom in, that's a lot of detail right there. That's kind of cool. That's the iPhone, right? It's probably more detail than we're used to when you're talking about cell phone photography, especially for iPhone users. I was walking around my favorite place here in Haven, and once again, this is the GFX, and that is the iPhone. Pretty much indistinguishable from each other. Just a little bit of difference on the way the lens curvature is looking, right? But if we zoom in on the GFX, we can see a lot of detail right here. Less detail on the iPhone, but still pretty impressive. Not bad. Let's go over here to this scene. This scene and that scene, GFX, iPhone. Let's go ahead and zoom in. This is the iPhone, the trees in the distance, and this is the GFX. Some more definition, absolutely. But the sky looks good. I remember some of my old iPhone 13 shots. When I'd go into the sky, it'd be grainy as heck, and this looks absolutely beautiful. So even though they have a lot more megapixels, it looks pretty cool. This was a shot that really surprised me. So at first, I was not sure which one was the iPhone and which one was the GFX. I was going back and forth, and I was like, oh my God, I can't tell. And it's still really hard to tell. I think that the background blur is pretty well matched. And then when you zoom in pretty close to these leaves, you get a lot of detail. This is the GFX file, and this is the iPhone file. And once it renders, boom, there's still a lot of detail. These are not that far away from each other, right? If you look at that versus looking at that, that's kind of crazy. You know, this is one of those ones that makes me kind of in awe. When you look at them full screen, they're super close. The background blur is super close. And yeah, it's just kind of stunning that the detail is there when you're in close, even on the iPhone file. That's pretty cool. Let's go to a couple more. This is one of those, kind of the same thing. GFX, iPhone, the background blur looks very similar. When we zoom in close, we're going to see some differences here in the spider web. This is the GFX file. You can see some definition in the lines a little bit more than you can with the iPhone file right there. Once it renders, not quite as defined, but honestly, again, we're this far back. For us to be able to zoom in on an iPhone file and see that kind of definition is still pretty stunning. I think that's still pretty cool. Let's go skip around a little bit. We're going to go to this file. That's the GFX. That's the iPhone. Pretty close to each other. I think there's a couple differences, though, when we look at some of the darker areas. This is the GFX file, and it's a little grainier. This is ISO 640. I had to boost the ISO just a little bit, and it looks pretty good. This is the iPhone file. That looks decent, but a lot more smudged, right? The detail is just not quite as much there as it is on the GFX. So that's the iPhone, and that's the GFX. So there's more grain, but the grain definitely looks a lot more pleasing, right? And then if we go to the brighter area right here, this is the GFX, and that's the iPhone. So the iPhone doesn't look nearly as good in the back. I'm not sure if that's where the out of focus areas are, or why, but it doesn't look as good. That's okay. A couple more. GFX, iPhone, pretty similar. Kind of wild, some color differences. Another one that's kind of shocking, I think, at first. They both look very, very close. I mean, that's some pretty nice rendering of the bright areas and the dark areas. GFX, iPhone, you can see some color differences, some nicer color in the GFX, but these are not like heavily edited or anything like that. But I think that the difference in something like this is definitely when you go into the shadows. So we'll go into the file here, and we're going to go to the GFX, and we're going to go into the shadows, and we're going to boost those shadows quite a bit. And when we boost them by, that's like 4 stops, we can see a decent amount of detail there. So they're a little grainier, but there's some detail. The only reason that those are blurry is mostly because of the depth of field, right? It's just blurry in the background. If we go over here to the iPhone and we start to boost it, it looks like absolute garbage. It looks really, really bad, right? It looks like that classic, really nasty, smeared iPhone stuff that just does not completely translate. It's just one of those things. Where's that? That's the reference point right there. It looks like two totally different things, right? Look at the detail in the GFX file. Look at the detail or the lack of detail in the iPhone file. So, all conditions being very good, I think that the iPhone does a great job. when conditions get pretty poor, the iPhone's going to be not nearly as good. I'm not going to really say too much more about this. I've just seen a lot of people on like Twitter and stuff like that kind of dogging on the iPhone, saying it's not a professional device and all that stuff. And as you can see, it's not perfect. And neither is the GFX. You know, you have to imagine that the iPhone, to be able to do what it's doing, is kind of crazy. It can actually keep up on the GFX file in some instances. And just that statement by itself is just insane to be able to say, right? When you start to edit and tweak a lot, I think that the iPhone files are going to fall apart a lot quicker. The GFX files are unbelievable to edit with. There's so much information there. There's a lot of color, and they're just going to be hold up, you know, a lot better. And there's a lot more definition that you could play with. You could pull out some more details probably. The iPhone, you're not going to be able to do it with. It's just, there's got to be some kind of limit, right? But still, is the difference that insane in good light? I don't think so. Also, you know, it's the idea of the GFX can do all kinds of stuff that the iPhone can't do, but it's the same as vice versa. And that's for every camera system. You can put the iPhone up against the Sony a7 IV or anything that you want to put on it and say, well, the Sony's going to just blow the iPhone out of the water. And that's kind of true. But at the same time, you have a device that you can put in your pocket. If you go to a situation where somebody tells you can't have the big cameras out, which I've been in, right? You got to put your cameras away. The iPhone gets in. The iPhone fits in your pocket. You could actually take the iPhone and script out a movie, right? You could open up notes. You could do the storyboarding. You could do the filming. You could do the editing, exporting it, and getting it to YouTube, wherever you want, and something that goes in your pocket. So it's okay to have both things be pretty amazing and kind of fun, and what a cool time that we're living in to be able to have this stuff and to be able to do what we're doing. So this is my quick comparison. I hope you enjoyed. You know, I know that some people can't imagine that the iPhone could even come close to touching anything on the big mirrorless market, especially a GFX, but I love my GFX. I love my high resolution stuff. I have the 100 in the other room. These things are incredible machines, but so is the iPhone. And for me, that's pretty sweet.